night sky. So usually when we look up, we spot a planet, we see this particularly big pinprick, that really significant point of light. Sometimes those points of light get really close together. And actually, during the period of history we're considering here with the Star of Bethlehem, there was a conjunction of Jupiter and Venus, where the planets that normally look bright individually in our sky did a very, very close dance indeed. And so how often do these planetary conjunctions happen? They're pretty frequent. They're not really rare things. They're happening multiple times a year as different planets get closer from each other, farther away from each other. And so the rarity isn't there. But if you have sometimes a conjunction where those two very bright planets get really close together, it can be a really unique experience that maybe can send people into awe, into intrigue, maybe be perceived as some sort of symbol or a sign. And so while Venus and Jupiter are not currently in conjunction, we're actually looking live at Venus through our telescope in Chile. And one beautiful thing that I love about Venus that we see here with wonderful clarity through those Slooh telescopes is that Venus, like our moon, has a phase. We're seeing only part of it illuminated, because as Venus orbits around the sun, we see different portions of that lit up half of Venus. And so this is one of the amazing ways that we figured out that the sun was in the center of our solar system, by looking at those phases of Venus and figuring out what we could see possibly from our location on our planet Earth. So we have Venus, and Venus would have been very, very close to Jupiter at a certain time in history. So maybe that Venus could have been a possible perpetrator of the Star of Bethlehem. But we have other theories out there. Another theory is that it may potentially have been a bright comet streaking through the sky. And so we actually have another live image coming in from Slooh. This is Comet 45P. We're looking at a comet that our wonderful Slooh Observatory manager, Paul Cox, is working on manually imaging live throughout the night. He's going to tell us a lot more about that a little later in the show. But so in terms of comets, they're not always visible to the naked eye. A lot more of them are visible through telescopes. So we have a great advantage here on Slooh, that even though there's not a comet that we can see right now with just our eyes, we can use a little bit of magnification, a little bit of technology, and see what's out there. So, but there are sometimes comets that we can see with our own eyes. And back in the day, that was the only option, is to look with your naked eyes. Remember back in the 1990s, we had Comet Hale-Bopp that was coming out. That was a pretty good one. I think particularly in 1996 and 1997, it was a really beautiful image out there in the night sky. And perhaps that comet, the bright ball with a tail, might have been considered some sort of arrow pointing people in the right direction. There are lots of different possibilities. And again, tonight we're looking at Comet 45P, which is actually making its close approach to Earth in the coming months. That's when we see these comets as being the brightest, when they get close to us here at Earth by the sun. That's when that comet heats up, sends out that brilliant spewing gas that becomes that comet tail. And so comets, though, that you see with the naked eye don't happen all that often. They're pretty unique events. We see great comets, or sometimes what they're called, really beautiful naked eye visible comets about every 10 years. And so it's not as common as conjunctions, and maybe something that was rare that appeared in the night sky could have been a point of interest, a sign, a symbol back in the day. And so those, though, aren't necessarily the only theories that we have out there. It's also the possibility that maybe it could have been a nova. So supernova, nova, those are a couple terms that astronomers throw about here and there. And so those are explosions that occur on stars. There are differences between nova and supernova, though. Supernova means that that star is exploding. That star is ending its life in this gigantic fireworks show. Nova is a little bit of a lighter issue. It's just a little bit of maybe a stellar burp, I would say. It's not ending the life, but it is making an explosion, sloughing off some material off that star. It has to do with, binary systems, all that stuff. I won't get into that. But in terms of nova, they can get pretty bright. They can get about 50 to 100,000 times brighter than our sun. And this can last for a couple months. And so maybe there was a nova out there that was close by, close enough for us to see it, that around that time that was significant enough for people to consider it a sign. That's also maybe a possibility we should investigate. And so in terms of nova, they're pretty infrequent visible objects as well, even rarer than visible naked eye comets. Their right one happens maybe about once every 20 years or so. There are some dimmer ones that we can see with our eyes, but one that would make a really big impression comes every couple decades. So the truth is, as we investigate all these possible theories, that we really, at the heart of it, don't precisely know what was going on during that time. We don't have a time machine that we can travel and get that first-person perspective, but that isn't going to stop us from trying to uncover the answer here tonight. We are scientists, we are observers, we are explorers, and we're all in this together. So let's see what we can see. And to help us do it, we've actually assembled Slooh's very own team of wise men, so to speak. We have Father James Krasinski, a Catholic priest and blogger from the Vatican Observatory, who will be joining us to help us understand the Church's stance on the subject and to help bridge the divide between science and religion. Because, a lot of times people choose one cookie or the other, but maybe there's the possibility of blending those two, and it'd be great to have a conversation about that. So speaking of, those different opportunities in terms of science, we have astronomy journalist and author Bob Berman, who will also be on the show to give us his own theories, sort of try and go into some of the things that we've introduced here, possibilities, and see how possible they might necessarily be. And we've also have the man who literally wrote the book on the subject, physicist and author Dr. Aaron Adair, will be joining us to talk about his book, The Star of Bethlehem, A Skeptical View, along with some of the more bizarre theories out there. So we should have an interesting conversation on that as well. And then beyond that, remember, Slooh astronomer Paul Cox, who he's also going to be on. He's the person that's live manually imaging that comet out there, and he's going to talk a little bit about that process and how you yourself can maybe one day go on a comet hunt of your own using Slooh's robotic telescopes in Chile and the Canary Islands. We have a lot of tools that could very easily be at your very own disposal. So we'll be talking to all of our guests, not just about the facts and figures, but also the faith of the matter, the belief, all the different variables here as we attempt to uncover either the truth or what people believe to be true, and what is the relationship between those two things. And of course, we want to know what you, our viewers, believe and know about all of this. Earlier today, we posted a poll on Twitter to find out what you believe to be the real story behind the Star of Bethlehem. And actually, here's what you had to say. Here are the numbers. So we gave you a couple options. You voted. Here it comes. 38% of you said it was a comet. That's a reasonable thought to it. Let's see what our experts later in the show have to say about that. Also, 30% of you thought maybe it would in fact be a star. And then 20% said it would be a conjunction. Then 10% said it was a UFO. That would be really cool. I hope you guys are right. That is all ahead tonight. So don't go anywhere. I'll be right back with Father James. Stay tuned.
This February, a ring of fire will rise over planet Earth. Millions will be plunged into the moon's shadow as it races across the planet at supersonic speeds. The annular eclipse will make its way across South America, through Chile and Argentina, before crossing the Atlantic Ocean, making landfall in Africa, casting Angola, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Zambia into shadow. On February 26th, explore an eclipse like you never have before. Be a part of this worldwide event, right here on Slooh. Space for everyone.
Welcome back to our Star of Bethlehem live show here on Slooh, Space for Everyone. I am Eric Edelman, and tonight we are diving into a lot of different perspectives here on this very intriguing star, or was it really a Star of Bethlehem? And it's the brilliant, bright object that appeared, according to the story, at the birth of Christ and guided the wise men to the manger. And so here we're seeing a possible contributor to that Star of Bethlehem, one of the possible planets that was in conjunction during that time, the planet Venus, that beautiful, bright object we see either in the early evening or the early dawn of our skies. And so, what a better way to kick things off than to start with the source of the matter, build up our fundamental understanding of what this is all about, what this Star of Bethlehem is all about. And what better way to understand a biblical story than with our first guest, blogger for the Vatican Observatory, Father James Krasinski. So, Father James, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me on, Eric. It's always a joy to be with Slooh and to participate in these live astronomy events. And as a Slooh member, it's always fun. And you did a beautiful job of introducing this question tonight and covered it nicely and really set the table well for our discussion moving forward.
I really appreciate that. There are so many perspectives, and we're really, I think, very intrigued to hear yours on this. And first off, I would love to ask you sort of to give us sort of the 101 on what this story is about. How is the Star of Bethlehem sort of related to the Bible? Where does it come from? And yeah, what's the background?
I'd love to do that for you. Basically, we have to look at two pieces of this puzzle. One, when was Jesus born? And then two, is there potentially some type of astronomical event that occurred about the time when Jesus was born? So those are the two things we're looking at scripturally. The problem is Scripture doesn't tell us when Jesus was born. As we come up on December 25th and celebrate Christmas, there can be this presumption that, well, of course it was December 25th when Jesus was born. Actually, when you start peeling through it, there's a whole range of dates historically that have been considered as a possibility of when Jesus was born, and also a range of years. And it's actually now pretty much consensus among scholars that to think that Jesus was born on December 25th, year zero, is not correct. That it was most likely in terms of years, the year closest to zero, maybe 2-3 BC, and furthest away, maybe 7-8-9 BC. When you start getting into 10-11-12 BC, you're starting to have some problems in terms of references to like King Herod and that type of thing. But then if you get too close to zero and beyond, it also doesn't fit some of the other minor clues that give us a range of dates but don't give us an exact date. So therefore, when we take a look at this, first of all, we have to acknowledge that when we look at when Jesus was born, we don't have a specific date, academically speaking, but a range of dates. So therefore, when we look for something that could be a culprit for the Star of Bethlehem, we then have to limit our exploration of astronomical events to that range of years, because obviously if you start getting outside of that range, now, yes, those events might have been fascinating and caught the eye of the people of the ancient world, but it's missing that connection with the birth of Jesus. And, as an example of how loose this whole thing is, the very story we're talking about from the Gospel of Matthew, which ironically is the only gospel that this story appears, doesn't appear in all four Gospels, it's only in one. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, so within the life of King Herod, so there's no real, narrowing factor there other than King Herod's life. Behold, magi or astrologers from the east, meaning non-Jewish wise men, astrologers, arrived in Jerusalem saying, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage." No reference to a date, no reference to as we were looking at this constellation or this event, we saw this new star. And then right after that is the most interesting part of it to me as a priest. When King Herod heard this, he was greatly troubled. And when I read those words, it's almost as if Herod was surprised, like, there's a star out there, there's a star of a new king. Well, of course, we presumed you would have known that this was there. And he didn't see it. And there's two different trajectories you can take in interpreting that. One, if it's an astronomical event, some may say, well, maybe it wasn't something that was huge and bright, as oftentimes our modern presumptions can be. Kind of like if you go to a children's Christmas special, like the neon light Star of Bethlehem with a Jesus is born here sign pointing down, but a much more subtle event, an event that would have needed a little bit more of a nuanced understanding of the heavens. And so therefore, in light of the openness of both the date of when Jesus was born, but also the openness and the nondescript nature that the star appears in Matthew. Tons of ink can be spilled by people of faith and people of science about what this might be, and just about every opinion is close to being just as valid as any others.
So there's a lot of wiggle room, is what I'm hearing. In terms of this, the possibilities out there, is there any sort of consensus within the church or among the clergy as to what the Star of Bethlehem might have been? Any press release that's been put out or that line?
Good question. There's not an official teaching by the church of what the star was. The church does not teach that it was a new star. It does not teach that it was a conjunction. It does not teach that it was a nova or a comet. And so therefore, this is one of those areas that's kind of fun. You can have some, intellectual play with it and explore different theories of what this might be, presuming that it was an actual astronomical event, which is something we can discuss too. Was this a metaphorical story? Was this something that was trying to not necessarily point to a literal event on this date in the sky, but was it trying to teach us something about who Jesus was when he came into the world? And that star becomes a metaphorical language for us understanding the divinity of Christ, his relationship with the Heavenly Father, and his relationship with us. And we can delve into all those type of things as we have our discussion.
And as you sort of thought about this over the course of your life through religion, through astronomy, have you found that there is one solution, one theory out there that you would like to believe in, or that you find that you think is probably what happened?
Yeah, great question, because for me personally, this isn't church teaching as a priest speaking. This is just one thing that I've learned as a Catholic, both as a layman before I was a priest and as a priest. When you begin to explore these type of things, there usually is a little bit of everything mixed into these things. So it wasn't just completely metaphorical or completely an astronomical event. For me personally, it wouldn't surprise me at all, because right in front of me, I just wrote down, and you mentioned some of them in your introduction, some of the different speculations on what the star might have been. March 29th of 4 BC, Michael Molnar's theory that it was actually a daytime event, that as the sun rose in the morning, that there was an alignment of the planets behind the sun that in the time of Caesar Augustus was understood as the birth of a great king. So not so much something you'd see in the night, but something you'd see in the morning. June 17th, 2 BC, that's John Moseley from the Griffith Observatory, and you mentioned this, of the conjunction of Jupiter and Venus, and how that would have been a striking event. Father Gustav Terrace, a Jesuit, November 12th of 7 BC, that Jupiter and Saturn came close and had this odd reaction with our atmosphere that would have had this eerie light shining down because of this event. My thought is when I see this many of events, my thought is that when we look at Christian faith expressed in the Bible is classic of taking the presumed cultural positions and flipping them on their heads. Meaning that, for example, with the kingdom of heaven, when the people of Jerusalem were waiting for a Messiah, some wanted a zealot, some wanted a military overthrow of the Holy Land, and establish a new Jerusalem that was more of a military state, get this occupying Roman army out of our country and have a new military state, much more of a sense of violence. Where Christ, when he comes to speak of his kingdom, speaks of a kingdom of nonviolence, speaks of a kingdom of peace. And in the story, for example, of the Roman centurion, that he doesn't see the Roman centurion as the enemy, but finds faith in the Roman centurion. When he approaches and said, "Could you please heal my daughter? Let's go to your house." And the centurion says to Jesus, "No, I'm a man of authority. I understand how this works. You say the word and it'll happen." And Jesus responds, "No greater faith have I found in all of Jerusalem than in this centurion." And so Jesus is modeling for us a very different vision of the kingdom. So when I look at all these astronomical events, I could very easily see that the author of Matthew is drawing upon these events and saying that, yeah, you know what? The world of this time, the non-Jewish world, is looking for a king. And that there's all these events that the non-Jewish world would have associated with a king. but we have a different king. We have a different understanding of what this star is and who the star represents. For example, there is no prediction in the Old Testament of a star in the sky. There is a prediction in the book of Numbers of a star that rises from Judah, but that's referencing a person, because in Jewish literature, astrology was actually condemned in Judaism, and the night skies represented one of two things. Either the stars in the heavens were giving glory to God, being a creation of God, or they represented people. And so the Star of Judah signifies a promised Messiah. And so therefore, like in the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. One of the theories that I find interesting about the birth of Jesus is that when we have references to the 25th day of the 9th month, that's actually of the lunar calendar of the Jewish people, and on how that's actually the Feast of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. So you have the Festival of Lights, this promise of this light that'll come into the darkness, and then this story from Matthew. And so therefore, I think it might be a little bit of both. It might not just be one astronomical event, but it might have been a series of events that was signaling to the people that time, look for a king, look for a Messiah, look for somebody to come into the world. But the world was looking for more of a military king, something that they would understand from their worldview, where Christ comes to give us a radically different worldview, a kingdom of peace, a kingdom of love, a kingdom of nonviolence. So that's my personal thoughts on where this might be heading.
It's really brings to heart for me how multifaceted this whole story of this Star of Bethlehem is. And thank you for being the first person on the broadcast to dive into this with me. Really appreciate you talking with me this evening.
No, it's always a joy to be on Slooh, and thank you for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Now, coming up on the show, we'll actually find out why scientists believe many objects, including some of the ones that we're looking at tonight, couldn't be the infamous star. So there are many possibilities out there, but people are putting giant red X's on top of a lot of them for a lot of different reasons. And a little later, I'll actually be talking to the man who did indeed write the book on this subject. Dr. Aaron Adair will be joining me to talk some more about some of the more out there explanations that people have come up with for the Star of Bethlehem. So stay tuned for all of that and more.
Give the gift of the universe. Give the gift of Slooh. A celebration of every magical moment in the night sky. For just $60, you can give the budding space explorer in your life the gift of a full year of Slooh membership. The perfect holiday gift is available now at slooh.com.
Welcome back to our Star of Bethlehem show here at Slooh, Space for Everyone. I'm Eric Edelman, and in our last segment, we dove into a little bit of sort of the religious background of this star, this potential star. Was it a star? Was it there? We don't know. We're figuring it out. So now we're actually going to check in more with the science of the side. For that, we turn to astronomy journalist and author Bob Berman. He has written rather extensively on this subject, and now he's here to fill us in. He'll be doing that very soon. But in the meantime, let's just take a look at this live imagery. Here we have about a comet 45P that's coming in from our Slooh observatories. And so comets, again, we're not seeing them really invisible with our naked eyes right now in the sky. The last one we were able to see was Comet Lovejoy in 2011, and the next one we're expecting to see with our naked eyes, just without telescopes. I think that's probably going to be Comet Wirtanen in 2018. And so really what we do have to use at this point when we want to enjoy comets is we have to use telescopes. So why do they so very rarely come into our visible view? A lot of that has to do with the orbits of comets. Unlike our planets, which have very, very circular orbits, they're not precisely circular. Comets actually have much more elliptical orbits. This is something that's sort of the shape you get when you stretch out a rubber band. And so what happens because of this high ellipticity is that these comets, they'll travel really close by to us and the sun, getting really bright as the sun's warmth heats up that comet, brings out that bright, brilliant tail as that outgassing occurs. But then, when it leaves our solar system, gets way out into the asteroid belt, the Kuiper belt, beyond Neptune, then they get a little bit colder, a little bit more latent. They're not bright and they're not really close by to us, so we can't see them quite as well. And so comets, they occasionally come by, they help us get our meteor showers, but we have to wait a long time to actually see them in person. And so seeing a comet in the night sky is a rare, intriguing sight, and one possible theory for what the Star of Bethlehem may possibly have been. But we're going to discuss a lot of that now with our science expert here on the team, Bob Berman. So I'm looking forward to talking with him about all this stuff. Thank you so much, Bob, for joining us here on the show.
Great to be here. Always good seeing you, Eric. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you as well. Happy holidays. It's fun to do this sort of holiday themed show and think about the reasons why we have these special festivities that we do. And there are a lot of theories as to what the Star of Bethlehem may or may not have been. We have, the comet possibility. Maybe it was a star. Maybe it was a conjunction. Maybe it was a UFO. Maybe something exploded somewhere. There's lots of possibilities. And are there certain theories that you think stick better than others? Could you maybe name the top 2 or 3 possibilities in your mind and why you think they're pretty good?
None of them are good, Eric. They're all bogus. They're all phony.
Oh no. So on the other side, what's the worst one?
Well, the problem is back in the 1930s when planetarium shows started to do this, the idea was very laudable. As you know, science was trying to find rational reasons for everything we could in terms of, what the Bible and any other religious books were saying, and that's perfectly valid. If we can explain something, great, we should. The problem is, and I've interviewed a number of planetarium directors who all know this, that all the explanations that are offered in the planetarium shows, none of them could have possibly been the explanation. And yet the shows with names like Star of Wonder have become a tradition in and of themselves. And people want to go to the planetarium and see the Christmas show and bring their kids to Star of Bethlehem shows. And so this has become a whole thing. But if we're going to be honest, and no sense not being honest, if we're going to do the science, then we need to do correct science and not bogus science. And so there are specific reasons why none of the explanations. I loved our father, James, at the Vatican Observatory. He's always so articulate about it. He's been very kind in the way he was explaining it. And one of the reasons, yes, we're going to have an expert on, I know, in a few minutes, who wrote the book about this. And I was very honored when he asked me to do the foreword. And the reason he asked me to do that foreword is because he got started on it, the author of this book about the Star of Bethlehem, from Discover magazine. We did a major spread. It was the very first article I ever did for them in 1989 about the Star of Bethlehem. And they did not like, Discover magazine is a science journal. And they did not like, and I did not like, the fake science that's presented as an explanation. So should I take a moment to say why none of this works?
Well, so one thing I'd love is if we can get to the brass tacks of this. So in terms of throwing out a theory versus keeping it in the box, it would be great to establish some guidelines. Like we were talking earlier about how maybe the birth date isn't quite right. Maybe we have some wiggle room there. In your mind, what are the necessary categories a theory has to hit to be possible?
You're quite right. We want something that would have been in the sky at around that time. For example, on January 23rd, 5 BC, that could have been around the birth. There was an amazingly beautiful conjunction between Jupiter, Saturn, and the moon. Very tight in the sky, beautiful thing. And so it's things like that that are considered to be, well, maybe that was really the Star of Bethlehem. but the one thing it has to go along with is the account. And by the way, the Star of Bethlehem appears in the Gospel of Matthew, but there's not one word about it in the Gospel of Luke. So the author of the Luke Gospel, Luke himself, presumably, saw no Star of Bethlehem, only Matthew did. So there it said that the Magi, the wise men, as they came in, they saw the star leading them, and then it stopped and stood before them. Stopped and stood before them. So every theory has to explain something that's not only eye-catching in the sky, excuse me, but can actually stop and lead. And what planetarium directors told me is that, well, we know that nothing in the sky can lead. Well, then you'd say, well, what do you mean nothing can lead? Well, every astronomer, and you're a professional astronomer yourself, I know, Eric, knows that everything in the sky, whether we say maybe it was a conjunction, maybe it was a bright planet, maybe it was a supernova, maybe it was a comet, whatever it is, it's going to rise in the east, it's going to arc across the sky, move rightward during the night. If you're observing from north of the equator, which certainly Bethlehem is, and then sets in the west. So if you're following something in the sky, you're going in a giant circle during the night. Nothing in the sky can lead, with one exception. As you know, the North Star, or if there was a supernova very close to it at the North Celestial Pole, that's the only part of the sky that does not move with Earth's rotation. So if the Star of Bethlehem had been located there, near the North Celestial Pole, let's say it was a supernova, then yes, people could follow that. That could lead. The only problem is that then that object would have to be in the north, and the Magi were not going north. They were going southwest. So that takes care of that. That doesn't work. Not to mention that the zodiac, where all the planets are found, is never found in the northern sky. So that takes care of any explanation that would be a planet or a conjunction or anything like that. So the bottom line is, whether you say it's a comet or a conjunction or a supernova, nothing can lead people to Bethlehem or Paramus, New Jersey, or anywhere else in the sky, because everything is moving. And we all know that. You step outside, you go out an hour later, everything is shifted position. So we'd have to find an actual celestial object that defied the rotation of Earth, that stopped moving, that hovered above a particular spot. And if you can find one such object that's not in the north, you're welcome to it, but none of the explanations would work. And the interesting thing is, all the planetarium directors that run these shows are aware of this. They know that none of the explanations actually are in keeping with real science. So what we have, Eric, bottom line is, we have a religious story of a miraculous star that appeared and guided the Magi to their destiny, to Jesus's birth. And we have our scientific attempts to explain it, except that none of the popular ideas, well, maybe the Star of Bethlehem was this, maybe it was that, maybe it was this, none of them can fit in with the story, and yet we repeat it anyway, and we leave out the part. We don't tell our viewers, or if you're in a planetarium, you don't tell your visitors, but wait a minute, this could not have been the answer, because nobody could follow a comet or a supernova or a planet and get anywhere, let alone these objects don't come to a stop and hover over any place, because Earth keeps turning and the object keeps moving. So the answer is, no astronomical explanation satisfies the story. So we're defaulting to a different issue, which is that we have a religious story, a miraculous story, and we're presenting an explanation that has to unfold outside of science. Not to mention, we're saying essentially, if it's a supernova, that a supernova happened to blow up and appear just in the right spot to guide these people to Bethlehem and to Jesus's birth. And the Earth had to stop spinning just at the right time when they got there, so it would stay over that one spot. In other words, the explanation that we're offering is indistinguishable from a miracle, isn't it? So we're offering an alternative miracle to replace the biblical miracle. and yet we're not copping to the fact that what we're offering is not possible, that it would have to be miraculous. So if this smells a little bit fishy to you, that's because some of us in the astronomical community are saying, yeah, we've been doing it since the 1930s. It's a popular thing. What was the Star of Bethlehem? Most famous star in the sky. Everybody's heard of the Star of Bethlehem. Even people who can't identify a single real star in the sky have still heard of the Star of Bethlehem. What is it? What could it be? And so we've played around with this now for many, many decades. A comet, a supernova, planet, Jupiter. And the truth is that none of the explanations fit the narrative in Matthew. None of them do. And that's you know, you want to face the truth. That's the truth behind this.
And in looking at
Sorry,
this
I know
story,
I'm being like bah humbug with this, aren't I?
well, you know, it's really great to look at this story, look at the bare bones of what's being said, and say, this is what we know about how the sky works, and this is not quite how we see that working. At the same time, I would love to ask you a follow-up on that. In terms of
Please.
this story, if you think maybe there was the possibility that the writer of this story was exercising some hyperbole in what people saw, in how majestic it was, that maybe there was potentially a significant astronomical event that was occurring, and then the writers, with writers' license, they were saying, oh yes, but it's dancing across the sky in this way and caused these sorts of things.
Well,
So
fortunately, you're going to have Dr. Adair on, and in his research, he found that Matthew, who wrote his account about a century after Jesus was born, that his account of the star almost perfectly matches some popular literature at the time. So to his mind, it's very obvious that the author of the Gospel of Matthew, perhaps it was, lifted the story from just local fiction, literature, and then put it into his account. And therefore, it was a fictitious story. You know, for some years, the ongoing thing in the science community was that it was astrological, that back then, every great king would theoretically have had some omen, some astrological omen. And back there at the time, I can tell you that Jupiter was the ruling planet for Judea, which was the area that Bethlehem is in. They had a ruling planet. These were the Roman gods. Rome was administering that area at the time, and the planets all had their names from Roman gods. So Jupiter was their ruling planet. Aries was associated with Judea, and in 5 BC, Jupiter was in Aries very prominently, and had some spectacular conjunctions like the one on January 23rd with the moon and Saturn. And so many believed for many years, and perhaps this is even true, that it really had nothing to do with anything in the actual sky, but was an astrological omen. Of course, astrology fell out of favor with the church, and also fell out of favor with science as well, as you well know. So this is not an explanation that we're likely to give people in planetariums. We don't want to touch astrology, and Western religion doesn't want to touch astrology. So that could be the likely explanation for all of this, but it's not one you're likely to hear, because we're not going to go there, so to speak, to astrology.
And Bob, out of all that you've researched about this, all that you know, you seem like you're very knowledgeable on this subject. At the end of the day, what do you believe?
I shouldn't admit this, but I've seen miracles in my life. So, Eric, I actually believe in miracles. I believe that the so-called impossible can happen. And so for those who want to believe that a miraculous star appeared to let this happen, I'd say, why spoil that story by telling them, hey, we're scientists, we can tell you this was just a common day conjunction or a comet. There was nothing miraculous there. And we're gonna offer an alternative view, but then we offer something that's not even true to actual astronomy itself. I think it's one of those marriages that don't work for either party. You know, many of us have learned, don't mix religion and science, because you get odd offspring. You get offspring that are deformed in some way. And in this case, what you're getting is you're throwing cold water on the miraculous religious story, and you're not doing the science proper justice either. So the feeling of some of us is, each one has a place. The religion has a place, the science has a place, and let's be true to both of those things. And let's not mess them up or blur them up or do things that are not worthy of both of those pursuits.
Thank you so much for telling me, your thoughts on this. And we got this amazing diversity of perspective already, where we have your thoughts on sort of keeping the science and the religion in their separate boxes. And then we also had Father James, who is telling us a little bit more about the intermingling of the two. And so there's a lot of different, people and backgrounds out there, different strokes for different folks, I gotta say. But at the end of it all, Bob, thank you so much for joining me here tonight. I hope to see you again soon.
My pleasure, Eric. Thanks. Always good seeing you.
Yeah, you as well. And so that was astronomy journalist and author Bob Berman. So coming up next on the show, I will be talking with the man who, as I was mentioned, wrote that book on the subject. That's going to be Dr. Aaron Adair, who will be joining me to talk about some of the more bizarre explanations. So, we already just talked with Bob Berman about how some of the standard explanations seem pretty crazy when we apply science to them. How much further can we go into this rabbit hole? Stay tuned to find out.
Give the gift of the universe. Give the gift of Slooh. A celebration of every magical moment in the night sky. For just $60, you can give the budding space explorer in your life the gift of a full year of Slooh membership. The perfect holiday gift is available now at slooh.com.
So welcome back. Welcome to our Star of Bethlehem live show here on Slooh, Space for Everyone. I am Eric Edelman, and we've been talking about a lot of different things. We've heard a religious background. We've heard a scientific background for this story. We are exploring the possibilities, the lack of possibilities, and everything in between. We've talked about some of the commonly held beliefs, but now we want to get a little strange with this. We want to talk about the maybe more fringe cases out there. And to do that, we've got the man who literally did write the book on the subject, author of The Star of Bethlehem, A Skeptical View, Dr. Aaron Adair. Dr. Adair, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me.
It's going to be great to get into this conversation. First off, just wanted to know about that book. Why did you decide to write about the Star of Bethlehem? What sparked that passion for you?
Well, I think for a lot of people, they first get introduced to this topic by going to the planetarium. I was actually working in the planetarium beginning of my undergrad career, and had the Christmas show. It presented its particular view, and I was like, whoa, this was amazing. And it fit my own scientific and religious views at the time. So it, double hit me as this was awesome. Then I remember going home, they had some TV special and they presented some other theory. And then I was like, okay, which way am I supposed to really go with this? 10 years later, I finally write a book on the subject after all that research, and I'm still going.
Yeah, there's a lot to uncover, really. And earlier on the broadcast, we've just been scraping the surface here. We got a bit of the skeptic's view, and we were seeing that there's a whole lot of holes that can be poked into these possible theories that are sort of the common theories that people are floating about, astronomers and theologians alike. And so in your mind, is there any scientific explanation that possibly fits the criteria for this event?
Well, as Bob was mentioning, that if you take the story as it's presented in the text, it is clear that it's miraculous, that it is impossible. And that's how virtually every reader up until the 19th century read it. And then in the 19th century, there were some attempts to read all the miracles of the Bible as, oh, somebody just misunderstood something. Jesus walking on water. Oh, it was just a dark and stormy night. Jesus walking on the beach shore, and because they couldn't tell what was going on, it looked like he walked on water. Imagine that for every single miracle of the Bible, and you have early 19th century biblical studies. And that's where a lot of these Star of Bethlehem explanations came out of and have just been repeated for the last 200 years.
Wow, that's a very complicated tapestry that's been weaved. And so in terms of that, maybe it's something just really strange, really weird. So we had a poll earlier on in the night, wanted to see what viewers thought that this Star of Bethlehem could possibly have been back in the day. And there was about 10% of them that was like, what if it's a UFO? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's usually one of the two more bizarre ones. The other bizarre one I can think of is all the Planet X stuff, where it gets mixed in with all sorts of other unlikely explanations of planets causing catastrophe stuff, whether it's Immanuel Velikovsky stuff or Zachariah Sitchin and Anunnaki, not so good scholarship. But at least the UFO one is interesting because a UFO can at least move around in the sky, hover around a particular house, and like shine a big laser pointer, say, go here. That's at least physically possible, but it does have, two major issues. One, I'm pretty sure the author of the book would have called it a ship rather than a star because they have a word for ships. And secondly, we don't even know if there's anybody else in the universe, let alone that they would come here and bother a few priests from Persia just to come around and mess with Palestinians. It's
It was
initially
the
implausible.
teenage equivalent of aliens doing a prank on humanity along those lines, something like that. So in terms of the Star of Bethlehem, at the end of the day, you think it was more of a symbol than something that was a real object that was out there?
I think it has to be because not only is it describing something that's outside of physical bounds, and usually we should be taking miracle stories skeptically, but there are historical features of the story that just don't make sense. There are events going on here where you should be having literally a clash between the Roman and Persian empires about who is controlling Israel at this time. This should have been basically on every version of CNN in antiquity, and yet it doesn't register. It has other features, like, for example, usually we're assuming that the wise men, the magi in the original Greek, were these great astrologers, and that's why they're interested in the sky. But we actually know that at this time, the magi actually didn't have astrological interest. They didn't have that until centuries later, under a completely different imperial regime. So the Greeks thought otherwise, and that's part of the reason the author of the story included them, because people in the West thought incorrectly about the Persian priests, and that gets thrown in there. And ultimately, what we're seeing are the sort of tropes you get with all sorts of heroic figures. Pretty much anyone who was a hero was claimed to be, the son of a god who had some miraculous birth, that somebody tried killing them as a kid, but they were whisked away, that there were some sort of events at their birth to show just how awesome they were going to be. Whether this was Plato, whether this was Caesar Augustus, whether this was more legendary figures like Perseus or Heracles, pretty much you get the same sort of stories over and over again. So when you see it repeated in the gospel story, you can say, okay, this is the context the author is going for. Let's see what point they're trying to drive based on that background. And if you miss that and try to do horoscopes or syzygies or ephemeris, you're just missing the point.
So, in all that you've sort of researched on this subject, the Star of Bethlehem, the book that you've written, at the end of the day, what do you believe to be the truth about all this?
The best explanation I can think of is that it's ultimately a literary creation in a way that we see basically used throughout the gospel literatures, about how they're reflecting on things from the Old Testament and trying to use that to craft the narrative that they want to tell about Jesus. Whether this is the canonical gospels or the ones that didn't make the cut into the New Testament, they follow a similar writing procedure. Um, Sometimes they're even explicit, like Matthew's often explicit, saying, here's this verse from the Old Testament, here's it being quote unquote fulfilled, even if it's not quite the way people expected at the time, but ultimately to help put together the story, even into the absurd, where literally, like when Jesus is going to be entering Jerusalem for the first time, Matthew reads this prophecy from Zechariah and believes that Jesus has to ride in not just on a donkey, but two donkeys at once, and like do some sort of rodeo technique where he's on like one adult donkey and a baby donkey at the same time. It's absurd if you were trying to think about it. It would look just something like out of a Texas rodeo, but it fulfilled prophecy, quote unquote. So I see that technique over and over. There are some details, though, that make me think there could be a little bit more depth, that there could be an even deeper mythology behind this whole story, but that's for a future exploration, keep the viewers interested.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sort of digging deeper into this topic with us. I think we've come at it from a lot of different angles, and you really did add a valuable perspective here. So thank you again for joining us tonight, and I hope I see you again on the Slooh Show sometime soon.
Please invite me. I'm willing to keep talking until you stop me.
Sounds good to me. Thanks again, Dr. Adair. And so this about does it for us here on this Star of Bethlehem show. I hope that you found some of these different guests and perspectives interesting. Maybe there was one that resonated with you more than another. We sort of tried to round it out a bit, get some of the hard science, get more of the religion in there, and see, you know, what we can see about this. Was it a point of light in the sky? Was it apocryphal? Was it there? Was it not? Does it matter? Lots of questions. And maybe we have more questions at the end of this than answers in terms of the potential out there. But I don't think that's stopped us from having an interesting journey of discovery here today. And really a great thanks to all of our guests who participated, our four wise men, if you will. Father James Krasinski of the Vatican Observatory, astronomy journalist and author Bob Berman, and the physicist and author Aaron Adair. So yes, my correction, 3 wise men we had here tonight. And so we talked to these 3 people about the Star of Bethlehem and gained their perspectives on the event. So now, myself, I think it's time to add a bit of my own perspective here. In my mind, there's this Star of Bethlehem, there's this subject, the Star of Bethlehem, and this star, you know, we've discussed it here, probably doesn't have really strict origins in reality. Its history's a little wavy, may just be part of a story. But either way, whatever it is, the fact that this is the story that they chose to tell, the fact that it's a star, the star, the sky above that is said to come to life with light, in honor of this birth of this rather influential man. That in itself, that it's the star. I think that speaks volumes. It says that in some ways the sky is where we turn when we're looking for greatness and majesty and miracles. We still do that today, don't we? When we wish on shooting stars, when we look at eclipses of the moon, of the sun, when watching the planets dance across the sky, we look up and we're awed. And here we have this bright object in the sky that signifies a birth, a fierce, unshakable, unfathomable spark in a dark sky. And I believe, it's my belief that we include stars in stories like these because we find them to be beautiful. We relate to them, and we relate them to the waxings and wanings, the peaks and troughs of our own lives so that we can get closer to them and to bring their light closer to us. So with that thought in mind, if you're looking to go further into space exploration and a love of space, maybe looking to give a gift of the universe to a friend or family member, you can pick up the Slooh gift membership in our new store, but that's actually not the only thing. You can also get copies of our brand new book, The Saturn Above It, an anthology of fiction about space. I'm actually currently reading that right now. Let me tell you, it is pretty great. I'm personally loving all the different perspectives that you get of space. It makes you think about space in different ways through different eyes, and I love that. And there are awesome Slooh polo shirts and even eclipse glasses to help you prepare for next year's transcontinental solar eclipse. So honestly, it is too late to pick up any last-minute Christmas gifts. They're not going to get there by the 25th, but you don't need to have a holiday to give the gift of Slooh. So at the end of it all, I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's live stream of the Star of Bethlehem. The next show isn't far away, so stay tuned for more. On January 3rd, we'll actually be looking skyward, hoping to catch some shooting stars for the quadrantid meteor shower. So yes, it's in the midst of meteor shower season. We're still not done with that yet. If you haven't gotten sick of meteors, stick with Slooh. And we've got lots of great shows on the way in the coming months. 2017 will be wonderful for astronomy. The very first solar eclipse of 2017 is right around the corner. In February, this annular solar eclipse will sweep across South America, the Atlantic, and parts of Africa on February 26th. And we're already making plans. Gotta be, it's pretty big. We're making plans for the big transcontinental eclipse on August 21st. The total solar eclipse will make its way across the whole of the United States, and Slooh will be on site to capture the whole thing. So be sure to follow our ongoing coverage of this once-in-a-lifetime event. So yes, there's much to come, but for tonight, thank you again so much for joining us. I hope you had a wonderful time. So my name is Eric Edelman, and you've been watching Slooh.